I'm Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and I'm back with another hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Well, tonight, November 10th, we have an update, albeit sad, on the long saga that has been the Senate Agriculture Appropriations Bill. Now, you remember for months now, Mitch McConnell has been playing the game of trying to sneak hemp ban language in a large funding package that was tied to the entire government shutdown. Well, as of Sunday night, that the government took the procedural vote to reopen the government, that language remained, and it was a zero point 0.4 milligrams of THC in an entire container or package of any hemp products. Most full spectrum CBD products have more than that. So our economists at Bo Whitney Economics estimates that THC limit will eliminate 95% of the industry. So on Sunday night, it goes through, and the subsequent day, on Monday the 10th, Senator Rand Paul spent all day trying to ground up support from other Senate offices for an amendment that would strip the language from this large bill and instead ask that it be handled in other committees of jurisdiction like the Agriculture or House Energy and Commerce, which oversees the FDA. On the Senate floor, Rand Paul gave a passionate speech, and he was joined by a Democratic colleague from Oregon, Jeff Merkley, that spoke to the truths of the bill and mentioned the impact it would have on farmers and their districts. And I find it particularly interesting that Senator Merkley referenced that it was two senators from Oregon and Kentucky that worked on the 2018 Farm Bill together, albeit at the time it was Mitch McConnell and Ron Wyden. After Merkley's remarks, Senator McConnell also spoke. I'll say wasn't very passionate, and mentioned that this is going to protect CBD products and restore the intent of the 2018 Farm Bill by only allowing for industrial crops. The Senate was then asked to table the bill, which means that before you can even vote yes or no on Rand Paul's amendment, they were voting yes or no to even hear the amendment. And that tabling vote was overwhelmingly in Mitch McConnell's favor. As of this recording, I think it was 78-22, but that was not the official result. So it may go off one or two votes there. But still, Mitch McConnell played every card he had, cashed in all of his chips, and called in a lot of favors, and had even Democrats joining him on agreeing to completely ban this $28 billion industry. Now, there is a 365-day implementation period before the bill would become law. It also needs to pass the House, and there are some other efforts that we're working on behind the scenes to see if we'll have similar House champions. And then, of course, the president needs to sign it. Now, if the president signs this bill, we already have bill sponsors lined up that would work for regulatory bills that could possibly override this bill and increase the milligram limit, or implement other regulatory regimes through proper channels like the FDA or HHS. So still a long way to go on this long saga of hemp, of course. But tonight, November 10th, was a tough defeat. I'm not going to lie. For Bayou City Hemp and Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Kerry Hinkle.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the B Block, or second section of our weekly news show. I'm Alaina Pinto. There were a lot of firsts after Election Day, and we've already told you about the first female governor to be elected in the state of Virginia when Abigail Spanberger won. But did you know that Mickey Sherrill, another female who won a state's governor race in New Jersey, went to the same college? Both attended the University of Virginia, and when both were freshman representatives in Washington, D.C., they actually shared an apartment. And while Spanberger made history in Virginia, Sherrill also made a little history in the Garden State. When she won that election on Tuesday, she became the first female Democrat to win the New Jersey governor's race. There was another first on election night, too, in New York. City when Zohran Mamdani won the mayoral election and became the first Muslim to win as mayor in the Big Apple. The 37-year-old is also the first openly pro-cannabis mayor of New York. And during a debate 2 weeks ago, Mamdani admitted that he has purchased cannabis at a legal cannabis shop in the past. And when New York legalized the plant in 2021, Mamdani tweeted out, quote, "In the course of this debate, I've heard many of our colleagues from across the aisle discuss that smoking or ingesting marijuana is an indication of lawlessness and a deteriorating quality of life, makes one lazy and a burden to society, serves as a gateway drug, and amidst this fiction and frankly coded language, I'd also like to present a fact, which is that smoking or ingesting marijuana may also lead to you becoming an elected official," unquote. The times are changing. Or maybe they haven't. Media reports describe Mamdani as of Indian origin, born in Uganda, and now labeled as a democratic socialist Muslim. Can we just call him mayor now, though? He is also a 2014 graduate of Bowdoin College in Maine. There's an interesting story out of Washington, D.C. this week that was reported by Marijuana Moment about the writing of the 2018 Farm Bill. You might remember that bill basically gave the cannabis sativa plant a federally legal definition that is now called hemp. The man writing the letter to Marijuana Moment is Stephen Bevin. At the time, he was one of the principals for the U.S. Hemp Roundtable that helped Senator Mitch McConnell with the writing of the Farm Bill. In that original bill, the FDA was supposed to be the regulatory body for hemp-derived THC products, but 7 years later, the FDA hasn't done anything. In fact, they've allowed the infused products industry to grow mostly unregulated into a multi-billion-dollar market. As you probably know, our government is currently shut down and not really operational. Politicians continue to point bipartisan fingers at each other and blame each other for the current dysfunction. They now seem focused on closing the so-called loophole in that 2018 Farm Bill that was created when they actually passed it in the first place. In his letter, Stephen Bevin explained this week that there was never a so-called loophole that our current lawmakers are trying to fill. He made it clear that those who now want to ban all THC-infused products and, quote, claim it's about protecting children from dangerous products, he explains that, quote, simple age gating and responsible consumption resolve this. He continues, quote, instead of focusing on citizens' access to wellness and the positive economic benefits being realized from the national hemp experiment, it worked. They bizarrely suggest a return to prohibition, unquote. This is what Kerry Hinkle and his industry are frustrated about. Simple regulation, age gating, and more regulations on labeling should calm everyone down. But what this Congress will do is still anyone's guess. One state that is always in the news when it comes to cannabis or hemp is the Show Me State of Missouri. And this week, the Missouri Cannabis Trade Association released research titled the Missouri Hemp Hoax Report. In that report, the association purchased 55 hemp-infused products from illegal stores and had them tested. What do you think they found? 53 of the 55 products tested far exceeded the 0.3% of THC in dry weight that is supposed to be the limit for legal hemp-derived products. In addition to the fact that most of these products exceeded that 0.3% THC was the fact that many of those products had THC content between 10 and 80%. That's even more than the legal cannabis adult use shops in that state. They also found that 29% of those products purchased at illegal stores had harmful contaminants, including pesticides, heavy metals, and residual solvents. It seems every state has issues with THC-infused products, and now there are more issues in Arizona. So let's check in with Karen Black.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. First up, I need to set the record straight from last week. I reported the Arizona Court of Appeals was scheduled to hear oral arguments on November 4th in the case of the Hemp-Industry Trade Association of Arizona versus Attorney General Chris Mays in the ongoing battle over the sale of products with hemp-derived THC. We think the hearing is scheduled for November 14th, but I can't confirm that at this time. Meanwhile, the temporary stay remains in effect, so non-licensed retailers can continue to sell these products while the appeal moves through the courts. We'll continue following this important case, so stay tuned. Speaking of HEDA, they represented at the Greenbuild International Conference this past week in Los Angeles. It's been 5 years this month since Arizonans voted to legalize adult use cannabis sales, but it's not exactly a celebration. According to Mary O'Driscoll's post on AZ Big Media, the industry is experiencing what leaders are calling a full swing market correction. Sales continue to decline, which experts say is actually healthy. The market overestimated demand, and now it's matching reality. Companies like Copper State Farms and Infused say the winners going forward will be the ones who consolidate, innovate, and introduce new product formats. Translation: scale up, stay lean, or get left behind. And speaking of workplace issues, an Arizona bud tender is taking Story Cannabis to court. The former Phoenix area employee filed a federal class action lawsuit alleging the company illegally withheld tips and used them to cover cash register shortages. Story Cannabis has 11 locations here in Arizona, and the lawsuit also involves former workers from Ohio and Maryland. At least 200 employees could be affected across all 3 states. We'll be watching how this plays out, because it could set a precedent for labor practices across the industry. And lastly, some good news. Rose Law Group, which runs one of Arizona's most prominent cannabis legal practices, has been recognized in the 2026 Best Law Firms Tier 3 rankings in 3 practice areas in Scottsdale. That's the kind of business leadership Arizona's cannabis industry needs right now. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There are only 6 states in the United States who have not decriminalized cannabis, and one of them is Idaho. That's a state that still has possession crimes on its books, but now there is a movement to change that. Over the past week, the Natural Medicine Alliance of Idaho received approval to start to collect at least 70,000 Idaho voter signatures by April 30th of next year in order to get a medical cannabis question on the ballot. The biggest challenge will be getting signatures from at least 18 of the state's 35 legislative districts. So let's hope they don't use some of the tactics that Massachusetts has been dealing with, a prohibitionist movement for a ballot question. Okay, let's check in with Tina Tasaka in Nevada and the tribal nations.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, an iconic representation, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The Omaha Tribe of Nebraska asserts that the state has no authority to block non-tribal citizens from purchasing medical cannabis on tribal land. They say their program is fully tribally licensed, audited, tested, and regulated, separate from the state system. The tribe's Attorney General, John Cartier, signed off on the statement. They warn if the Nebraska persists in trying to obstruct their lawful operations, the tribe will defend its sovereignty through all available means. The inaugural Vlasic Classic took place November 8th at the Paiute Golf Course in Nevada, marking its first West Coast debut after 5 successful tournaments in the Midwest. More than just golf and good times, this event unites the community around a mission of advocacy, equity, and positive change within the cannabis industry. In partnership with the Last Prisoner Project, the Classic raises vital funds for legal aid, job training, and family reunification for individuals affected by cannabis-related incarceration. In addition to the tournament, attendees can enjoy a silent auction, live entertainment, networking mixers, vendor showcases, and community engagement activities, creating a full weekend of purpose and connection by blending philanthropy, sport, and advocacy. Vlasic Labs CEO Willie Vlasic launched the Vlasic Classic Charity Golf Tournament in 2023, first in the Missouri Ozarks, and then expanded to Michigan in 2024 to support the Last Prisoner Project. In 2025, the Michigan event also raised funds for Freedom Grow. That's it for the Nevada highlights and tribal nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Iconic Representation for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Marianne from Alibi with the Oregon Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Oregon's 2025 outdoor harvest is another record-breaking 12.18 million pounds. So far, 2025 production is running about 9% over last year's record-breaking harvests for another record-breaking year. Sales revenue so far this year is down about 4% compared to last year. This price compression is continuing to put extreme pressures on licensed operators. This upcoming year will be another test of operational efficiency for Oregon operators. And in better news, Oregon State University published a study showing that proximity to cannabis dispensaries is linked to lower alcohol consumption. Alcohol is one of the leading preventable causes of death in the United States. Also note that animal researchers in 1973 were unable to find a dose of THC that would be lethal for primates. So, can we now say that access to cannabis will create a healthier nation? I'm Marianne from Alibi with the Oregon Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In the publicly traded cannabis stocks this week, one of the nation's largest multi-state operators, Trulieve, restructured some of their debt that was going to come due in 2026. This restructuring of their debt is more than $360 million, avoiding what many in the industry fear in 2026, when debt in the industry will come due. And some are referring to that day as a tsunami because of the amount of debt in the cannabis industry. What impact has that had on Trulieve stock? Here's Doug Miller.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Trulieve is paying off $368 million in debt. That's the full 8% loan well before its 2026 due date. Trulieve still owes about $110 million at 7.9%, but they're showing major strength with $450 million cash on hand and 12.5 million branded products sold last quarter. That's up 7% year over year. But it's not all good vibes. The company's also sitting on a hefty $616 million in uncertainty tax liabilities. Yeah, the IRS isn't exactly seeing eye to eye with their stance on 280E deductions. CEO Kim Rivers says their 2025 strategic plan is delivering results with progress on reform, distribution, customers, and branded products. So while other MSOs brace for a $6 billion debt storm coming soon, Trulieve just found a way to stay afloat. So let's see how Trulieve's stock chart looks. It's trading around $6.61, and it's been pulling back, but it's not looking bad to get set back up after this pullback. Watch for dips as it sets up, trade smart, and lock in those profits. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
Now it's time for the international reports on cannabis from around the world.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermidor with your UK Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. And here today we're at the Charter House just look at this room, it's insane. I mean, we've got all the 16th, 17th century adornments around the room. We've had some really interesting and insightful conversations and presentations from patients, from medical professionals working here in the UK medical cannabis sector. We've heard about everything from the endocannabinoid system to terpenes to cannabinoids, all the way down to patient needs, drug interactions, and even people's personal journeys. So again, some of the key issues we've been hearing time and time again today, very much about access to medical cannabis, how we can change that. The need for home grow has been a very, very important thing. NHS availability is another one that people really want to see happening here in the UK. And, it's the importance of community in helping new and existing patients navigate the medical cannabis system. And with, 12,000 NHS patients and 90,000 private medical cannabis patients, those numbers are only going to increase. And it's only a matter of time before The government needs to take this seriously and do something about it. I'm Dave Barton, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Let's check in now with our favorite clone guy from Chicago. Here's Mark Allen.
What's up, everybody? I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm just outside of Chicago, Illinois. Thanks for tuning in. As always, I've had a busy week. Let's take a look at one of the many things I've done this week. Was to repot all these plants from their previous 1-gallon plastic pot containers into their new 20-gallon fabric pot containers. Notice how they're all elevated on the pallets to keep them from sitting on the cold concrete floor. If you leave a plant on the concrete floor in the winter, that concrete stays very cold, which in turn will keep the roots cold, which will allow them not to absorb nutrients. So long story short, elevate your plants to have better growth in the winter if they're on concrete. In other news, besides what I've done this week, the Chicago Sun-Times was actually doing some investigative journalism, which I'm happy to report. But I'm not happy to report what they found. Long story short, they went and got one of the most popular marijuana products in Illinois legally from dispensaries, pre-rolls. They got specifically about 10 pre-rolls. Almost every single pre-roll they got tested positive for mold, yeast, and various types of bacteria. All these pre-rolls were stated to be approved and clean by the state. Another issue that they found with these pre-rolls is that 2 of the 10 pre-rolls actually had dramatically less THC in them than listed on the box, the paperwork itself. And the reason why this is a big issue is that in the state of Illinois, you pay extra for higher level THC. You pay extra tax and extra money for that. So people paid extra quality money, extra for their product, and they got way less. But that was interesting news that I found out from Chicago Sun-Times. Thanks for doing that reporting, Chicago Sun-Times. But that sums up the news for Chicagoland area. I am Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for this week's edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Consume it responsibly, and we'll see you next week.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Pro Cannabis Media is now WPCM TV, your go-to website for things cannabis. WPCM TV is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news you need.
Amy Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And talk shows about all things cannabis.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important.
It all started back in 2018 when Emmy award-winning talk show host Jimmy Young kicked it off with the In the Weeds podcast.
That it's not just any generic paper towel. You do have a brand that you use, right?
Yeah, we live or die by the bounty. I mean,
the quicker picker-upper. I love that.
His mission? Building an army of multimedia journalists and podcast hosts who are documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Fast forward to today, and we've got the nation's only weekly cannabis coast-to-coast news program with Alaina Pinto.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto.
Delivering the nation's only TV news-style program. Since June 2021, WPCM TV has racked up over 1.3 million views, with 17 million impressions, and picked up over 16,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. For more information, contact the team at WPCMTV.com.